part of me that thinks there's got to be a couple, at the very least, in the room that disagree with the BS that's on display. But then I'm swiftly reminded of this YouTube channel from a few years ago. All the videos, multiple different politicians from multiple different parties. Ruth Davidson, Anasol Sarwar, Ginger Pugh, Ross Greer, Kate Forbes. Where else have we got? Jackson Carlos there as well. Thin Lips, obviously. Michael Russo. Just the sheer amount of them all pledging their allegiance to the UN's global goals.
It's important. Resilient people see challenges, commit to goals, focus on what they can control, don't blame themselves, are empathetic and think positively.
How have we become a resilient community? We are the monthly community cafe to pay for residential trips. We know about children.
We know about being environmentally friendly. Rather clever little scheme the Scottish Government concocted. You know, getting climate change related issues into the curriculum, leaving enough time to pass for the children to become well and truly brainwashed, then wait for the signal from Greta Thunberg to orchestrate a march, and then pretend that it's down to the children being so scared about their future that they are forced to implement a cancerous commie Green New Deal. Environmentally friendly. It's just brainwashing.
Children's rights. We are pupil leaders. We all train as sports leaders, the playground pals. We work with the our boss people. We learn about the global goals for sustainable development. All of our topics are linked to these global goals.
Need I say any more?
The Sustainable Development Goals are global goals. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was agreed by the United Nations in 2015 as a plan of action for people, planet and prosperity. The agenda aspires to end poverty and hunger, to protect the planet from degradation, to ensure prosperous and fulfilling lives for all, and to foster peaceful, just and inclusive societies.
Now tell me, how do they intend to prevent poverty or reduce poverty when they're trying to force us all to abandon our means of finance, redistributing our wealth, supposedly in theory, to Middle Eastern and African countries who are poor, while simultaneously preventing them from having their own equivalent of an industrial revolution? It doesn't take a rocket scientist, or better yet, a climatologist, quote unquote, to figure out what's going on here. They're taking away our ability to make money. They're taking away the money that we've got, pretending that they're going to give it to the Middle East and Africa, when realistically they're keeping it for themselves. If these people really cared about reducing poverty, then explain to me why the likes of Bill Gates, David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, Maurice Strong, Ted Turner, all of whom have their fingers in several UN-related pies, all multi-millionaires if not billionaires, but yet they're not parting with their cash. Funny that. And on a separate note, in regards to the so-called climate emergency, all these people, they stand there at their podiums, regardless of which country they're in, and they speak in a manner that to the untrained eye, somebody that's observing on their couch and whatnot, it's almost as if they're trying to give off this illusion that this is all set in stone, it's all concrete fact. The science is settled, quote unquote. But yet, these are the same pricks who 2-3 years ago were not talking about this at all. Right? Now all of a sudden, there's a climate emergency and all these people have all kicked into gear and are acting accordingly. Now, we're expected to believe that they know something that if we were to find out for ourselves and see the proof that they've seen, we'd be completely on board. Do these people really look like they've seen the damning evidence that proves that this planet is heading for a collision course unless drastic action is taken? Remind me again what the Scottish Tin Pot Parliament did after declaring a so-called climate emergency. They fucked off in Hawley for 2 months. And it doesn't stop Nicola Thin Lips flying around all over the joint, and Armani, by the way, to talk about climate change. Why can't you video conference? And as for this guff that's happening towards the end of this year, the Glasgow UN Summit, COP26, whatever it's called, you know, all that wasted coin, all that CO2 emissions in Madrid. And the only thing that they could agree upon was to have a meeting this year in Glasgow, bearing in mind, of course, though, that prior to their meeting in Madrid last year, it was already agreed that Glasgow would be the year after. So they went to Madrid to talk shit in a conference, and then the only thing that they were able to conclude as a result of was that they will have a follow-up meeting in Glasgow. A meeting that was already arranged prior. Good one. But it doesn't stop Nicola Thin-Lips, doesn't stop these pricks. Every single one of them.
Big ambitions. They require innumerable actions by very large numbers of actors, governments, intergovernment agencies, non-government organisations, businesses, trade unions, voluntary and community organisations and individuals around the world.
That's great. Now tell me again, what the fuck has feminism and social justice, etc., got to do with the climate emergency? Why are you all sitting on your arses talking about feminism, etc., if there's a climate emergency out there? Why is David Attenborough all of a sudden so concerned about the climate? The science has settled, it has been for some time. Whoa, I didn't hear David Attenborough concerned about my childhood when I was a child. He now gives a shit, right on cue, just the same as the rest of them. And as for Ginger Pubes Harry Hewitt and his wife, giving it the big eye about climate change, another one talking about climate deniers, all these people are the same. I didn't hear them talking about this shit 2-3 years ago.
Be proud of the actions taken by many from and in Scotland towards achieving those goals worldwide.
Oh yeah, something to be real proud of.
Whether through NGOs, through churches or faith communities, through secondment from work in our public services, or directly as volunteers or as part of government engagement with developing countries, many thousands of people make a real and substantial contribution to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals in some of the poorest countries on the planet.
Completely glossing over the fact, of course, that millions upon millions have been given to African countries over the past, 20-25 years. It just never reaches their intended targets. But now we have to pretend that a brand new scheme has been created, and this time round, things will change.
But the global goals apply here too. Scotland will be judged not just on the work Scots do or support elsewhere. We will be judged on how far we as a country measure up against those global goals.
Oh, we're going to get judged. Ooh.
That is why today's debate is focused on the latest report from Scottish civil society on progress in Scotland towards achieving the UN's global goals. On target for 2030.
What a gigantic waste of taxpayers' fucking money this is.
Asks the question of how we are doing here, measured against the same standards as the rest of the world, and it produces...
Well, the thing that they have done since Nicola Thin-Lips took over the SNP is implement policy after policy after policy at the behest of the United Nations. They do nothing else. Then they get to brag after the fact about how much further forward they are in comparison to the rest of the UK. Well, that's probably got something to do with the fact that they do fuck all else.
Answers. The question really matters. So we are indebted to Oxfam in partnership with the University of the West of Scotland and to the SDG Network Scotland for bringing this comprehensive assessment forward. Organisations working at the front line of the whole range of sustainable development issues right across Scotland. Scotland's International Development Alliance puts all of this in the context of Scotland's place in the wider world and emphasises that all of these goals must be addressed together, not separately.
Or what?
And it is a sobering assessment. When so many of our constituents rely on food banks to feed their families, members will not be surprised to learn from Nourish Scotland that 8% of the Scottish population describe themselves as food insecure.
And it just so happens there's a convenient solution to rectify that issue. One of the global goals, making it a human right to access food. Now, how do you encompass that on a global scale? Well, you're going to have to start looking into GMO foods, aren't you? Bill Gates will be on the case for that one.
It's the finding of research by Citizens Advice Scotland that 12% of households in Scotland may struggle to afford their charges for water and sewerage.
Aye. Applause is in order for this paper-thin display from a puppet politician pretending to give a shit, considering the fact he's pretending that there's a climate emergency that requires drastic action. Our solutions, of course, will be to implement related policies and sustainability-related policies, like the boilers that they've started installing down at the Central Belt. Boilers that are responsible for nearly tripling the bills for people living down there, my cousins included.
Rejection from
about the people of Scotland, but yet these are the same people that all sit there with their hands in their pockets and allow Nicola Thin-Lips and the Rainbow Unicorn Party to pump multiple millions into social justice related issues, into a climate justice initiative, etc., while they all stand there and unanimously shrug their shoulders and blame austerity. You people, I can't stand hearing it's deceptive and it's inexcusable as far as I'm really no different to the lefties down south that sit and complain about homelessness and housing shortages and overcrowded schools, but yet stand there outside Parliament with their "Say No to Racism" placards and want open borders or the flow of migration to continue as previous.
The Scottish Government target means that in 2040, 5% of the Scottish population will still be in fuel poverty due to poor energy efficiency. A common thread among many of these analyses is the need to tackle inequality. Another is the need to do so with the participation of those affected by inequalities themselves.
Oh yeah. And how do you plan to do that?
Oxfam quote figures from the Office of National Statistics confirming that the wealth held by the top 10% of households is around 5 times greater than the wealth of the bottom half combined.
So fucking what? It's not the fault of the rich in Scotland for the plight of the poor.
And they conclude that until we address inequalities of power and political participation, progress on addressing economic inequality will be hindered. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation demonstrates that Scotland has simultaneously reached record levels of employment and record levels of in-work poverty at the same time in recent years, which taken together mean that we have not met the Sustainable Development Goal of decent work for all.
Oh no.
The SDUC highlights some of the sectors where poverty pay holds workers back, particularly women, and calls for sectoral agreements to
particularly women. Go on fuck.
Minimum terms and conditions,
particularly
in social care, and to promote collective bargaining in early learning and childcare. Disturbingly, in the context of a goal of inclusive and sustainable economic growth, it reports daily stories from young hospitality workers about bullying, harassment and unpaid wages, the kind of stories we would hope not to be hearing. On target for 2030 do not attempt to summarise the range of contributions, but they do draw some conclusions, which I hope the Minister will address in closing this debate. It is, however, available thus far only online in draft form, and the network is very keen to see that review concluded and published in its final form as soon as possible. And I hope the Minister can give that undertaking today. And finally, Presiding Officer, the SDG network also calls on us as a Parliament to align our own remits more closely with the Sustainable Development Goals, with regular debates in future to hold government to account on progress made.
Exists in the wealthy north. Economic disadvantage and marginalisation. That exists in the wealthy northeast of Scotland, as it does in other parts of our country. That inequality relates to discrimination against women and girls.
Does it aye?
Too much unhealthy eating. So are we on target to meet our goals? Yes.
Too much unhealthy eating results in inequality, apparently.
Making progress on a number of targets, in particular water and sanitation, energy share for renewables, forest management, because this is an all-encompassing agenda. Eradicate.
Is it a small group of world leaders were to conclude that the principal risk to the earth, comes from the actions of the rich countries. That's convenient, rather convenient. And if the world is to survive, those rich countries would have to sign an agreement reducing their impact on the environment. Will they do it? The group's conclusion is no. The rich countries won't do it. They won't change. So in order to save the planet, the group decides, isn't that the only hope for the planet that the industrialised civilizations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? It is simply not feasible for sovereignty to be exercised unilaterally by individual nation states, however powerful. It is a principle which will yield only slowly and reluctantly to the imperative of global environmental cooperation. Our concepts of ballot box democracy
may need to be modified to produce strong governments capable of making difficult decisions.
Eradicate.
Isn't it the only hope for the planet that the industrialised nations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about? The voice belonged to Marie Strong, Secretary General of the UN Chairman of the Earth Summit.
Approach is fractured. The Sustainable Development Goals and our own National Performance Framework are, of course, our compass, both moral and directional, to tackling extreme poverty, inequalities, combating climate change, and so much more. None of these aims can be achieved in isolation. I suspect that all political parties, governments, and indeed civil servants find the apparent simplicity of working in portfolio silos still hard to break down sometimes, but we do this today at our peril. The 13th of the SDGs is on climate action, and in my mind relevant to the achievement of all the other goals. This section has been authored by Stop Climate Chaos, whose collective work I want to recognise in coalescing parliamentarians and others around this action in the climate emergency.
The climate... Why are they all sitting there talking about a report about the lack of effort being put into the quote-unquote sustainable development goals? Why are they not doing something about the so-called climate emergency? Why are they waiting until November to talk shit at a summit? Why are they standing there reading from scripts?
Today's World Economic Forum risks report reinforced the grave concerns, which I don't need to highlight for this chamber and across Scotland today. However, action on climate change is needed very urgently.
Oh, that's convenient.
I stress, if it is delivered without justice, it is simply a Pyrrhic victory.
Justice?
The report states that I quote, the restoration of blue carbon stores can contribute towards mitigating and adapting to climate change by making our oceans more resilient to change. And more broadly and importantly, without a step...
The same changes that they experienced long before human activity, they were experiencing long before the Industrial Revolution. Thin lips in the Labour government, etc., etc. They're going to implement some policies that's going to make the water resilient. So much dribble, so little substance.